Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, I'm Tom Dillon, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Helen Leathers. Hello, Helen, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Good. I said that in a very excited way, didn't I?
You did.
Hello.
I think it's because we've just had chocolate hobnobs.
That's what it is, yeah.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. So, what are we talking about today, Helen?
Well, you know, from time to time we talk about a topic that people
We do. It's
bring
one of our regular slots, isn't it?
Yeah.
A topic that comes into the coaching room.
Yep. So we thought we'd talk about change today.
Changes. That's been in my head all morning.
You've
funny, isn't
taken
it?
to singing on the podcast recently, haven't you?
I'll get in a full song eventually. David Bowie, bit of changes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So change is a huge, huge topic.
Yes, it is.
So we're only going to touch on it today, I think.
20 minutes worth.
Yeah. So we kind of hold that most people come to coaching because there's something that they want to change in their lives, don't we?
Yeah, although I suppose traditionally coaching was about goals. And which you could say, well, that's something changing. If you've got a goal and you're not there, then moving towards the goal is change. But I think within our coaching, we both recognise that quite often people will come because either something has changed, so the world around them has changed, or there's some change that they want to bring about. They're not quite, something's not sitting right and they want to bring about some change. So I think the two aspects of it really. So I think if someone comes and things have changed around them, so it's extrinsic change, if change is being done to them, then I think they can find that problematic. And I think we can do good work in the coaching room, just helping them to get some perspective on the change that's happening.
I think now is usually the time that other podcasts would roll out the Kübler Ross change curve.
Yeah, which I think having an awareness of those stages of change would be good, just as a bit of a framework to realise why someone might be struggling with the change. Because if we just go, well, it's changed, yeah, okay, get on with it. Yeah. So recognising that there are those different stages, so someone might just be in denial. I've certainly sat in a coaching room with someone who was at risk of redundancy. That's the phrase they use, isn't it? When they knew.
Yeah.
Well, the organisation knew it was going to be them, but there's that conversation to be had. There's some discussion. So they were going through that process of redundancy, and they said, well, it won't happen. They've talked about this before. It's not going to happen. So the denial was definitely a part of that process that they went through.
Yeah.
And then some anger about why it was them when it turned out it was them. So some anger about that. And this was over several coaching conversations. And then some sadness that realising, well, the anger wasn't going to do them any good, that there was no point in fighting it was going to happen. And then moving through the sadness to get to looking at the future. And obviously that's what coaching is all about, is focusing on the future and what are you going to do as a result? What would you like to have happen?
Yeah. And I think we should just say that we talk about this more in episode 51, the Kübler Ross change curve that isn't a curve.
Yes, that's good to point out.
Yeah.
So if we go back to that, then we recognise that Kübler Ross didn't have a change curve. But I think when it does come to change, it is useful to recognise that there will be some emotion attached to it and some different emotional responses that people go through. But overall, people do acclimatise to the new reality.
Yeah.
So that's good to recognise, I think. And I think for coaches, we can do good work just in reassuring someone that these are quite normal emotions to feel when going through change. And not as glib as this too shall pass, but recognising that it is a stage to go through and that hopefully things will improve.
Yes.
Yeah. So something around normalising the emotional reaction to change for people. I think some perspective taking can be really good as well. So recognising why the change is happening from the organisational perspective, what it means for the people around them, how they might reframe it more positively. So again, not being glib, but It's a lovely bit in it. It's a film, George Clooney film, Up in the Air, where he's responsible for getting rid of people. The company's making people redundant, bring him in, and he has to have the conversation and say, "You're being let go." And there was a lovely piece where he's talking to someone and saying, "How much did they pay you to give up on your dreams?" I said, what are you talking about? He said, "Well, you were a chef. You studied French cuisine, and then you ended up pushing paper around in this organisation for the last 20 years. So at what point did you just give up on those dreams? And how would your children feel if you went back to being a chef?" And it was obviously it's a movie, it's scripted, but there was something about, actually, this isn't what I wanted to do with my life, and here's an opportunity to do something different. So change is happening, but I could make something of the change. And I think quite often when people come into coaching, there is some big change happening, but it is a great opportunity to think about what's important in your life, to reconnect with your values, and actually to think, I have some time left. What do I want to do with that? What's a new direction for me? To
find some new perspective and to explore possibilities.
Coaching is a lovely space to do that, isn't it? Just look at different options that are available to someone. So I think that's one side of change, where change is happening and they have to come to terms with the change. And then another side of change is where they want something to change. And they might not recognise that it is change at the outset. They might see it as a problem.
Yes.
But if we get to the change part of Tom's code, we've looked at the situation, they've told us all about what the problem is, and then if we ask, and what would you like to have happen? We then get to change, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they tell us, well, I want it to be like this.
And that gives us that thing to work towards. Or it gives them that thing to work towards.
Yeah. So I think we've got those two different aspects. So change isn't easy, and certainly if it's being done to you, there's a degree to which you have to work to accept it. If you're wanting to bring about change, then I think the work is around what you actually want to have happen. And then the steps that you're going to take, the options you've got to make that happen, but then the steps you're going to take to move forward on it.
Yeah, so really defining what that change looks like, as well as how you're going to get there.
Yeah. So one of the things, apart from Kübler Ross's change curve, there's a model called the change house that looks at the different rooms that we might be in when change happens. So I can't remember the guy's name, but it was a Swedish psychologist who came up with this idea. And I think the first room that he has people sitting in is the room of contentment, which, if you're happy with your job and you're happy with life, then you might be sitting in that room, and then some change happens, and that room of denial might exist. Or one of the nice little add-ons to the room of contentment is the sun deck, which is kind of like being too contented. You're just cruising and you're out on the sun deck, not really working at any self-development or growth or anything. So then there's the room of denial, where people are just denying it. Well, it's never going to happen. But if we spend too long in the room of denial, because we know it's going to happen really, it is just, we're not quite getting our head around it, we can end up in the cellar of despair.
Oh, crikey, this is a great house, isn't it? I'm thinking Swedish guy, it's got to be a link to IKEA here.
No link to IKEA.
Okay.
So we go from the room of contentment to the room of denial and perhaps the cellar of despair, because we're not moving on in our thinking. And then we might come to the room of confusion. So again, we're kind of accepting that change is happening. And if we think perhaps of organisational change, something's changed in the organisation. They think, well, we're now doing it this way. And we might go, oh no, they've said this before, it's not going to happen. We'll carry on as we are, but then we get to that point, okay, it's definitely happening, but I don't know how this is going to work. So might be some talk about that. But you might get into the pit of paralysis. So if we're stuck in the pit of paralysis, then the change isn't actually happening, but we're not getting what we want either. Or we might go through the door of wrong choices going, well, this is a waste of time, we're not doing this. So let's go back to where we were in the room of contentment. And just go full circle, so nothing has really changed. But obviously something needs to change. So that's not the best place to be. So eventually we get to the room of renewal.
Oh, that sounds like a nice place. Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously from an organisational perspective, people would want to end up, the organisation would want you to end up in the room of renewal. But I think maybe there's room in the attic. I'm not sure what belongs in the attic. There's definitely room in the attic for something. We haven't covered that. We've got cellars and pits.
But no one explored the attic.
No.
Interesting. No. I wonder what might be there. Maybe that's some kind of inspirational area.
Yeah. So the room of renewal, we go into it, but then we go full cycle. So if we get to the room of renewal, things have changed, we get used to the new way of being, then potentially we end up back in the room of contentment. And might need something to change. So if we think about the GB cycling team, they had that ethos of continuous improvement, incremental change, trying to make things ever so slightly better than they were before. So if we stick in the room of contentment, then there is no change. We don't want to end up in the room of denial, but I think that idea that change is constant and that it's not something to be afraid of is a great way of thinking about life.
Yeah, I think so.
And when we talk in Gestalt coaching about paradoxical change, it is that idea that change is happening all around us. So you and I on this podcast today, we will leave this podcast and something will have changed for us. Our awareness of change and our thinking around change will have altered. So and that idea that perhaps change is happening in a way that we don't intend. So if we're pushing for change, quite often that's not what happens. And the best way to think about change is to become more who you are and do more of the things that you love, and then change will happen automatically. Yes. It will just happen. It will just emerge. So I think in my coaching, that's something that I try to have in mind, is that by having the conversation and talking through change with someone, change will start to emerge anyway. We don't need to try to be something we're not in order to change.
Yeah, we sort of don't need to be pushing at a door that might be the door of wrong choices.
It might be the door of wrong choices. Or it might be that we're being asked to change to be how someone else wants us to be. Which is not a great place to be either, is it?
No. No, and what coaching is brilliant for is helping people to become more of themselves, more of who they truly are. And therefore, change is inevitable.
Yeah. And I know that important moments in my life where I've been fighting against something, some events happened or someone's seen things from a different perspective, and I've kind of been perhaps in that place of anger, that stage of anger around change. What it takes is for me to become more me in order to let go of that.
Yes. So if I think about the time I said to my friend, I'm just going to go and be me and do things that make me happy and see what happens in my life, I think the next week I met you.
Ta-da! There I was.
Just by being more me.
There
you were, as if by magic.
How lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I think there is something in that about just, and I think it's attributed to Barack Obama, but probably was Gandhi or someone else, but that be the change you want to see. So I think if we do want to bring about change, that's about us behaving in an authentic way. And a lot of the coaching that I do is around people being authentic and showing up. I'm coaching someone at the moment that he is really authentic, but really struggling with how the system treats him as an authentic person. So he's very matter of fact, where his predecessor was kind of all for exaggerating the figures and making things look brilliant, and all the projections were way off the chart and everything was going to be brilliant in 5 years' time. But the 5 years never got any closer. Whereas this guy's just very, okay, this is reality. We're going to do our best to get where we want to get to, but this is where we are. And the projections are showing this. So this is what we're living with. And he's just he's just him. And so some of the work that I'm doing with him is that allowing him to hold that space and reflect that back to him, that he's showing up as himself and who he wants to be in that space. Yeah. It's almost not, obviously I can't influence how he shows up, but it's almost him giving himself permission to be authentic.
Yes.
And not to allow the system to change him in some way.
I think most of the work I do is around that, about people, women who I work with, remembering who they are and remembering who they wanted to be. And it's really powerful, really transformational.
Yeah, when we've talked about change and that showing up, but now we're talking about people being who they are and not changing to allow different change to emerge.
Yeah.
So I think this chap, I think his organisation will be in much better shape if he's allowed to be himself, and just for that change to emerge.
Hence the term paradoxical change.
Paradoxical change, yeah. It's a lovely phrase.
Isn't it?
Yeah. So that's the start of our journey through change. We will have some tools. We've obviously talked about the Kübler Ross change curve and the change house, which is another model. We'll share an image of that in the show notes, that you might want to talk through with people about change when it's happening to them and how they might view that. Because I think it normalises it if someone is struggling to go, well, this is quite a normal thing to go through.
Yeah.
You're in this room at the moment, but over time you'll move to this other room. So I think that's a useful model to explore. It was interesting to explore that during COVID because we had change in the change house at work and change in the change house at home and change in the change house in the social scenario. So all three houses came together and the change was going on in all of them at the same time, which I think is really difficult.
Yeah. Where do you retreat to then? Yeah.
So I think that is another useful model, but there are lots of other ways that we might work with change as we support someone.
So we'll come back and visit this
and we'll
again.
come back and visit another time. But for today, I think that is sufficient change.
Yes.
So thank you, Helen. Enjoyed that.
Thank you. I enjoyed that too.
We will see you next time when we will be...
We have an interview with the lovely Dr. Nikki Paul, who's been through our coaching programme and is out there helping other people who are facing difficult changes.
Lovely. Oh, that'll merge quite nicely into that. A lovely segue into that
Absolutely.
session. And she's a lovely lady. We would look forward to talking to her on the next episode. So until then, we will say goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye for now.
See you next time.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.